My name's Angela Kienholz, and I'm here with Linda Ross Swanson, who's a grief counselor. Really wanting to understand the grief process a little more, so I have a few questions to ask her. And how I discovered her, she's an author about wisdom wills. And so I understand that you teach people and have workshops about how they can write out their wisdom will to share with their loved ones, you know, even after they've passed away. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah. I call the workshop the power of your story, writing your wisdom legacy, and it's based on the tradition of a Jewish ethical will that goes back to ancient times. But I didn't like the name ethical will, so I trademarked the name wisdom will. But what it is really a legacy letter of your wisdom, your values, your beliefs, what got you through the tough times, who your mentors were, how they informed your worldview, and so forth. So it's less daunting than a memoir because it's a letter. It could even just be a list of things that you've learned in life, your epiphanies. And then you can bequeath it with your legal will. It's not a legal document, but you can bequeath it with your legal will when you die, or you can give it to loved ones and friends at significant moments like weddings, births, or whenever it feels right. But what it does for, in terms of being a grief counselor, what I have found that it does for people that are grieving a loved one is if they have one of these letters, it really helps assuage some of the grief because it becomes a talisman. When times are really tough, when they're really having a hard time, they can pull out that letter and say, gee, this is what life meant to Dad before he died, and this is what he thought of us, and this is what he learned from adversity, and oh my goodness, he went through this really tough time, you know, and he taught me that it's not about the falling down, it's about the getting up again, and you know, you can take that to heart, and it's something you can pass on from one generation to the next so that our memories are actually kept alive for generations.
Good, thank you. Well, I do want to say that I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to meet with me today and to talk about the grief process and how there's those different types of grief, because it really helps me as well as the people who visit our website. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Angela. Often at a funeral, there is a viewing of the body, usually the night before or days before the funeral proper. The body is often an open casket so people can actually see the body, and some people need to see the body to help them get their minds around the reality of the death. Some people don't want to see the body, they want to remember the person the way they were, but for some people it's critical. And I can't stress that enough. If children want to view the body, they should be allowed to view the body. And then the ceremony is usually planned by the family, so often there's familiar songs, sometimes there's videos and that sort of thing. And even sometimes stories are told about the deceased. So it's immediate. It's pretty close to the person's death. And so family and relatives, everyone gathers around and share that experience together, and the community grieves together, and it's a way of acknowledging that the person existed and that they were valued, and it gives support to the family as a whole. And a memorial service is often similar, but there's generally no viewing of the body, there's no open casket. They have a service similar to a funeral, and they may tell stories and have a big potluck. It's more of a celebration of life in some ways than a funeral, although a funeral can be called a celebration of life as well, depending on how you want to have it. But memorial is often done not quite so soon as a funeral. Sometimes it's put off for 3 months. Even my sister has waited almost a year, and she's going to have a ceremony up at Willamette Cemetery with the ashes. But so it can be delayed. And grief is worst right in the beginning, obviously. So in a funeral, this is where people are really raw, although they may be in shock and they may be walking around in ropes, they're going to be getting a lot of support. But it would almost be nice to have a memorial 6 or 8 weeks down the road, because by then all the family has left and everybody's alone and the reality of the grief is actually set in. And so I always tell people, you know, give folks a phone call 6 weeks down the road and on special occasions, because those are going to be the toughest times. But they're similar, except that grief is not quite as raw, I don't think, with the memorial.
This leads into another question I have. How can people help someone when their loved ones passed away? What are the right things to say or do to support them?
Well, there are horror stories, as you know, that people meaning well, most people mean well. They really want to say the right thing. They want to be supportive. And in their ignorance, sometimes they say things like, if you've lost a child, well, good thing you have another child, or thank God you believe in God because your child is in heaven. Well, those things don't mean a lot to somebody that's grieving. They don't feel listened to. I think the most important thing you can do is be present to the other person, and by that I mean to listen closely, ask open-ended questions, and those are questions that can't be answered with a yes or a no. So you would ask how questions, or tell me more about that, or how did you feel when this happened? Or, you could even ask about how did you hear about the death? It's to encourage the people to talk, because in the talking process, healing has begun. But also to be listened to is part of the healing process, because you feel very alone when you've lost somebody. So if you have somebody just with you, but I think primarily is to be present with the person and let them know that you're there to support them. Just a hand on their arm sometimes is all they need. Phone calls.
Okay, all right. Well, here's a question. Is in the grieving process, some people decide that they want to go to a grief counselor to have someone listen to them. What are other ways that people can go through that process after it's been several months down the road?
And they don't want to necessarily go to a grief counselor?
Yes.
Well, I suggest that some people write letters to their loved ones, and they can take them up to the grave and read them, or just keep them in their journal. A real helpful way for me when I was going through the grief process, I lost 3 loved ones over a period of 20 months, and I found myself walking and walking and walking. And I think if you can do anything physical, that's great. If you don't feel like walking, you might want to take a yoga class or learn how to meditate. Find an activity that fills you in some way, nurtures your soul in some way. I mean, sometimes I just tell people, plan a bubble bath once a week.
Yeah.
Have a glass of wine, in the tub, turn some nice music on, nurture yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But I say there's 2 ways of grieving. One is a person processes, and in the way of processing it may mean talking or writing. Other people need to do something very physical. That's called instrumental grieving. A lot of times men are more into the instrumental grieving, like if their mother died, they might spend weeks clearing out the house or doing repairs or whatever. But they're not weeping. That doesn't mean they're not grieving. They're working off their grief.
Mm-hmm.
So it's real important that we not judge a person for how they're grieving, because it's all relative.
And it could be totally different.
It could be totally different. It's always totally different. And we never understand. It's wrong for us to say, I know how you feel, because you don't. Every death is personal to the person. It's individual to the person.
Yeah, it's a good point that you make, that it really could be different way of grieving, that everyone can do it entirely different from somebody else. So there's no wrong way or right way.
Yeah.
Is that right?
To stay away from judging how somebody's grieving. I mean, I've been judged for grieving, for not sobbing enough after my girlfriend died. Her husband really thought that I just didn't love her that much because I wasn't grieving the way he grieves. And it took me a long time to convince him that I was writing a book about her. That was how I was processing my grief. I was sobbing on my own, just not in public, and I was writing and writing and writing and writing.
Yeah, some people don't like crying in public too, so that needs to be understood. All right, thanks for that helpful information, Linda.